it. They're starting out at 4-0, and that's a big deal for Indiana. When you talk about the fact that in the last 3 seasons, they've only gotten to 4 wins once, and they've been playing absolutely abysmal football at the end of the Tom Allen era. Now entering Curt Cignetti, and everything has changed for the Hoosiers for the better. Things are on the upswing. And it's the perfect time to introduce Indiana Hoosiers Live at the Voice of College Football. The perfect time as Indiana seemingly is trying to become more of a football school. They're not just a basketball school. They can have success in football too with the right coach. And Curt Cignetti definitely seems like the right guy for the job. But we got a lot to get into tonight. There's a lot of stuff to talk about when it comes to Indiana football and what could be a fantastic season for the Hoosiers if they keep up their high level of play that they have had so far. But we've got Jeff in the house saying, I'm here. Appreciate you for stopping by, Jeff. It's going to be a fun show. Jackson as well saying, what's up, Hoosier Nation? Appreciate that, Jackson. Glad to see you. And Ballard Sports Media, thanks for stopping by. But first thing we got to get into with Indiana Hoosiers Live, the first edition of it, is the Charlotte reaction. And since we didn't have the show yet with the previous games that Indiana has played against FIU and Western Illinois and UCLA, we'll talk about those games briefly as well. But the main thing is the Charlotte game because it just happened. The Charlotte game was another game where Indiana looked very dominant. Basically, they've dominated in all 4 of their games this season, which is a great sign for Indiana because in the past, we all remember that Akron game with Tom Allen, that Akron game where Indiana went to 4 overtimes with a MAC school. Yeah, they won, but it was ugly. It was definitely not pretty, but they did a whole lot better so far this season with being able to get big wins, not just small wins, but massive wins. They beat Charlotte 52-14. And the funny thing is for Indiana is that was actually one of their worst performances, right? So you're talking about giving up 14 points to Charlotte, which was by far the most points they've given up this season to a poor opponent. They gave up 13 to UCLA, but Western Illinois, they gave up 3, and they only gave up 7 to FIU. So Charlotte, they gave up 14. Curt Cignetti was not too thrilled about that. He was very upset with that performance because he's like, we need to do better on defense. We got to keep this going. And that's what you got to love about Curt Cignetti because he wants them to do good on every single play. And even when they win big, giving up a touchdown, giving up a field goal, that's too much. He wants to shut every team out that they play. He wants Indiana to play high-level football game in and game out. And that's why it's such a good sign for Indiana in the fact that they are going out there and their defense is playing well most of the time. They're not giving up silly scores. They're not giving up easy points. And when they do, it's in the Charlotte game, at the beginning of the game, they kind of were with those 2 touchdowns. Curt Cignetti was not happy about it. But the main point of the game is the fact that in the second half, Indiana went from being up 24-14 at half, right before the half. Then they got to 31-14. But then in the second half, they blew the doors off of Charlotte. They went out there and destroyed them, didn't give up another point, and they ended up scoring 52 points, which has been a common theme for Indiana in the fact that they've been scoring a whole lot of points. Whole lot of points this season. 42 points against UCLA in the Rose Bowl, which was a massive win for Indiana there too, because you're talking about the fact that Indiana got their first ever win in the Rose Bowl. That was just a massive game for Indiana. I know UCLA might be really bad this year, and if that's the case, sorry for Bruins fans, but that was just so monumental for Indiana to get their first ever win in the Rose Bowl. Yeah, it's not as significant as winning in the Rose Bowl game, in the bowl game, but still a big deal for Indiana. So you talk about the fact that Indiana could do that in the Rose Bowl, no matter how bad the team was. And they had a lot of fans there at the Rose Bowl. Indiana has a lot of fans and alumni in California, in Los Angeles. So that's not a big surprise, but it does show that Indiana fans were pumped for that game. They were excited for that game, and they showed out. But the Western Illinois game, scoring 77 points, giving up 3. I mean, I don't even know what you can even say about that. I mean, yeah, Western Illinois is garbage, but still unbelievable from Indiana to do that. And then FIU is probably their worst performance of the season, but it was their first game trying to break into the new, system with Curt Cignetti, the new coach, just trying to feel things out a little bit. And yeah, they didn't look as good in that game, but still they dominated and controlled the game. But I think the Charlotte game, to be honest, might have been the most important for Indiana so far, even in the UCLA one, because the UCLA one, they were pumped up. They were fired up to get that win. But Curt Cignetti preached not having a letdown game, not just overlooking Charlotte. Yeah, you got that big win over UCLA. How many times have we seen, and I don't know if Will is in the chat, but we saw with Notre Dame, that was rough. When you talk about them beating Texas A&M on the road, huge win for Notre Dame, and then they turned back around and lost to Northern Illinois. That's what you can't do. You cannot do that any way, shape, or form. That was awful from Notre Dame. And then they turn back around and blow out Purdue. That was great for Notre Dame, but that's the thing. You got to do it game in and game out. That's what you have to do. You have to play well every single game, and that's why I believe that the Charlotte game was the most important for Indiana so far. You got your first big win, the game that got people's attention. Because even though the Western Illinois game, they scored all those points, which was fantastic, that didn't wake anybody up. The UCLA game is what woke people up to Indiana football this season with Curt Cignetti, that maybe they are actually going to be decent, that they're going to be a force potentially in the Big Ten. However that ends up being, whether they're even maybe a title contender, which that's way ahead. We don't know if they're going to be anywhere close to that. But it definitely shows that Indiana is possibly going to be a whole lot better than they've been the past few years for sure. Maybe they can at least get back to that 2019 and 2020 form that Tom Allen had them at. But I think the difference with the team they have now versus the team they had then is that Indiana has a team on both sides of the ball. The defense is mostly just really good, really solid. And the offense is maybe even better than the defense, which is insane, because of the fact that Indiana for the last few years, outside of Penix, their defense was really what actually counted. That it was their bread and butter. The offense has not really been there. That was more in the Kevin Wilson era about 10 years ago. That's when they had a good offense with Nate Sudfeld, Simi Cobbs, Tevin Coleman. They had some good players back then, but then their defense was more of the focus outside of Penix. But then when you talk about this year, both sides of the ball is good. That's the completely new look Indiana, is that both sides of the ball, there's really not a weakness. And that is just such a thing to see. Thing of beauty when it comes for Indiana football fans, and have not seen a lot of beautiful things the past few years. It's been very ugly for Indiana. So the Charlotte game, not having a letdown, going out there, and outside of a couple of sloppy first drives, especially on defense, they got it together and blew out Charlotte. And now they are very close to being ranked in the top 25 for the first time since week 1 of the 2021 season. Very close. Right now, they are 27th in the AP poll, and they are 27th in the coaches poll. So Indiana on the cusp. They're very close to being ranked, which would be huge for Indiana, to the image, just to say, hey, they're ranked. Indiana is actually legit in football. Because even though some people that follow football, very hard, they pay attention to all the games, they know that Indiana's different this year. Most people in America still don't know about Indiana. Until they get ranked, until they go out there and, win an even bigger game than UCLA, then Indiana's still kind of going to float under the radar a little bit. But they are definitely getting much more notoriety. And I think getting a win over Charlotte after a big, pretty solid win over UCLA, at least for Indiana standards, and getting that first win in the Rose Bowl was a massive thing to see for Indiana to continue to show that they are a different team. We got a lot of people here. Appreciate all you guys for showing out. In the chat tonight. We got Aaron Taylor saying Indiana looks for real. Appreciate that. Clint Moses saying, who's your daddy? Who's your dad? Thanks for that, Clint Moses. And then you got Jim saying they could go all the way. Well, it would be cool. Yeah, that would be great. That'd be great. I don't know. I'm keeping expectations tempered. I'm not saying that Indiana is anywhere near Big Ten title contender, but I do think that they have a shot anyway of having, for Indiana standards, an elite season. Keith Chavez is here for the first show t-shirt. That could happen. That could happen definitely in the future. Filet of Fish says it's pretty simple. I'll win, Google me. Absolutely. You can't beat that slogan. Curt Cignetti saying, I'll win, Google me. And then the Purdue sucks, but so does Michigan and Ohio State. I mean, you just can't beat Curt Cignetti. He's got some great one-liners. Absolutely. Dave Valesky says, if Indiana loses to Maryland, everybody's going to say it's just another typical Indiana year. We're going to get to that. Absolutely, we're going to get to that. The Indiana-Maryland game is going to be coming up later in the show. Going to be giving my predictions and thoughts on that game, but absolutely. Yeah, that'll be the worst thing for Indiana. All this momentum you've built up, and you drop that game, then, everybody's like, oh, it's just the same old Indiana. Trust me, that's exactly what they're going to say. Clint Moses, congratulations, Jeffrey, hosting the Indiana show. I know you take pride in your work. I appreciate that, Clint Moses, a lot. I love talking college football, variety of teams. Indiana, I'm like the only one people are like, he's the Indiana guy. He talks about IU when no one else will. I did it when they were bad, and now I'm here when they're really good. But yeah, definitely, I appreciate that, Clint Moses. Love talking college football. Really appreciate the opportunity. We also got Jim R saying, get him, Jeffrey, thanks. And Sports Talk with Austin as well. Congratulations, Jeffrey, and proud of you. I appreciate it, everybody. I really do. It's going to be a lot of fun. Thanks so much for being here. And we got the next segment of the show is breaking records with Curt Cignetti. So this is a key thing with Indiana in showcasing that they are legitimately better, that this doesn't seem like a facade. I know the games coming up in the season is really going to prove to people whether they're legit or not, but Indiana has already been breaking tons of records. Like, there's more than you can even like list on your hands. And I, like, off the top of my head, some of them probably I'll forget. But Indiana has already scored the most points in a game that they've ever scored in history. So Indiana's had football since 1901, which is a long time. You know, none of us were here when that happened. That was a long time ago. Not Rutgers, Princeton, or whatever, back in 1867 or whatever, 1869, but still a long time ago, 1901. And they've never scored 77 points. They scored 76, but they never scored 77. And they did that against Western Illinois. And also in that game, they had the most yards that they've ever put up in a game, 702. They've never done that either. So they've had the most yards in a game, and they've had the most points in a game. So it's Curt Cignetti already changing Indiana in that regard. Then you talk about the fact that Curt Cignetti is the first coach in Indiana history to start his career 4-0, which I know that's sad, right? You're talking most programs in college football that they've had multiple coaches where they probably started 5-0, 6-0, 7-0 in their tenure. Indiana's never had a coach start their tenure 4-0. And Curt Cignetti did that. And I know that the schedule's bad and was not hard. I know. I get it. It's still. But it's impressive. And Curt Cignetti was the first to do it. I mean, absolutely. You're talking about a whole host and a long list of coaches that Indiana's had. Even Bill Mallory, like, none of them did it. And Curt Cignetti was the first to do it. Indiana also has the most points scored of all the college football teams so far this season. They got more points than anybody, which is insane. You're talking about, you know, Alabama and Georgia. Yes, some of these teams have had big games so far. They've had quality opponents. But Indiana has more points than any of those, which is absolutely crazy. So also Indiana, like I already mentioned, breaking that record, getting that Rose Bowl win. But in that game, that was their largest Big Ten road victory since 2001, which is when they beat Wisconsin 62-31 by 31 points, which that sounds crazy, beating Wisconsin by that much. But the list goes on and on. Basically, the entire point is that Indiana is breaking record after record. Like every single week, they're breaking records of some sort, of some kind. And that's the key when talking about Curt Cignetti, that I was not expecting this. When Curt Cignetti got hired, I was like, wow, what an impressive hire. Yes, it's James Madison. Yes, it's the Sun Belt. But Curt Cignetti had the history of being an assistant under Nick Saban. And Curt Cignetti took Elon and Indiana University of Pennsylvania and James Madison, all these programs that before he got hired, none of them were good. And he made them better. James Madison, he took from the FCS to the FBS and just kept rolling with it. They were arguably better in the FBS than they were in the FCS, which is hard to believe. Then Indiana hires him, and I'm like, okay, I think he's going to do really well at Indiana. But he's doing so well, breaking all of these records, and now people are already having his name out there. And I don't even want to get into this. This is not going to be a segment. I don't even want to talk about this. But people are saying, oh, Curt Cignetti, he's going to end up getting hired by someone else. God forbid that happens. We do not want Curt Cignetti going to another school. He hopefully will stay at Indiana for the rest of his career. Because if these first 4 games are any indication, he's going to keep Indiana rolling. He's going to keep Indiana for Indiana standards. I have to keep, because some people are going to think, oh, he's saying Indiana's going to win it all. No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying for Indiana standards, they're going to be good. Like, Indiana historically has a 40% winning percentage. What that equates to in a 12-game season is less than 5-7. Indiana's not going to be doing that game in and game out. They're going to be doing better than that under Curt Cignetti. If Indiana is legit about being relevant in football, Yes, they're a basketball school, but let's face it, Indiana basketball hasn't been elite in 35 years. They need to get better in football to remain relevant, especially stay in the Big Ten if there's any realignment where they kick teams out of conferences, which we haven't had any proof of that, but you never know. So Cignetti is breaking records with Indiana so far. They're doing things they've never done before, and they're doing them quicker than I ever would have imagined, which is insane. That's why I think Curt Cignetti is 110% legit. When people, say that he's already should be a candidate for the Florida job and some of these other schools that possibly could be opening up soon, that shows you they think he's legit because people know how bad Indiana football is and what he's doing there. Even if these games and the teams that they're playing are awful, it's still very impressive that no coach in 125 years of Indiana Hoosier football has never done before. So that's why it's so important that Indiana is breaking all these records. And there's a few other minor records that they've broken as well. But those were the main ones that they've done. I mean, the fact that Indiana has not beaten a Big Ten team on the road by more than the points that they beat UCLA by 29 in 23 years. And the last time they did that with Wisconsin was when they had Anton Randall L at quarterback, which he was insane. The guy was very short. And he's most known for being basically the wide receiver in the NFL that won the Super Bowl for the Pittsburgh Steelers back in 2007. But he was really good, and he was on a garbage team, but he was able to lead Indiana to a victory over Wisconsin that year when they weren't good. But that was a long time ago. I wasn't even born yet. So Indiana just doesn't have success in the Big Ten. And even if UCLA is really bad, to get that big of a win is very impressive. So hopefully Curt Cignetti will be breaking tons more records in Indiana football. Hopefully he stays in Indiana football. And it looks like if things continue, then he should be having a lot more success in that regard. So we got TJ Ronan. Appreciate you for stopping by. Says let's go. Absolutely. ZV Wrestling says been a Hoosiers fan since 2014. Thought Tom Allen's the answer. Cignetti is the man right now. A bowl game is in our future, potentially year one. I agree, CV. If Indiana doesn't make a bowl game, and obviously, again, getting ahead of myself sometimes when I'm saying this kind of thing, but Indiana football is already at 4-0, and you're looking at the rest of their eight-game slate. I have a hard time not seeing them at least winning 2 of those games with how well they've played already. So they should make a bowl game. I mean, obviously, there's still a scenario where they don't, but I'll be shocked if they didn't. But that's fantastic, ZV, that you've been a Hoosier fan for 10 years. I mean, I've been, a fan of a few other college football teams for a lot longer. I grew up as an Alabama fan, still love Alabama football. But I started watching Indiana, I think, back in like 2017, 2018. I like Tom Allen's energy. I felt bad for Indiana that they were horrible. And really basketball now and football, both. Even though basketball had the history, football doesn't. But yeah, I wanted Tom Allen to succeed. And he was for brief. He was the answer for brief, especially when they had Penix and they had Kalen DeBoer, who I still can't believe he went from the offensive coordinator of Indiana to the head coach of Alabama. 2 teams I like, but going from Indiana to Alabama, I mean, the climb in the ladder there is unreal. Absolutely. That's just crazy. But definitely glad that you're here. And hopefully there'll be a lot of fun times to talk about with Indiana football later this year. We'll definitely be here to cover it. Jim R says if they continue, they will lose their coach. Is the question. It's the trendy scenario in today's college football. Yeah, I mean, it's worrying. It's absolutely worrying. I think if he leaves, then it's going to be tough for Indiana to even get anybody that's close to, a guy of Cignetti's ability. And what he's doing at a school that just doesn't win is crazy so far. I mean, it's a small sample size, but you can definitely tell, that Indiana is completely different than what they used to be. Jason says, Jeffrey's the only person who can get me to watch Indiana content. Best of luck with the new show, my man. Appreciate it, Jason. Appreciate it. It'd have been really funny, Jason, if I'd have started talking about Boston College. I know you'd have cracked up at that. Absolutely. But yeah, I'm not a Boston College hater, man, but definitely I appreciate you for stopping by. Jack says, don't forget to tell your friends, family, frenemies, and the cashiers at Publix about the magic Jeffrey brings every Tuesday night on Hoosiers Live. Thanks, Jackson. Definitely. Jackson, you can find him on Monday nights on Crimson Tide Live with the voice of college football. But definitely appreciate that, Jackson, a lot. Jim R says this deserves a like. Definitely. Everybody like the stream. It's on the ticker at the bottom, like the stream. Comment. You guys are doing a great job in the chat, but once the stream's over, comment there as well. Appreciate it a lot. And subscribe to the voice of college football. We will be having the show on the Indiana channel. There will be an Indiana channel That's going to happen. Indiana football, the voice of college football. But definitely would love if you guys watch over there as well. But definitely appreciate it. Keith Chavez says, time to give Sinetti an extension. Can't let him slip away. Absolutely. I'll probably be talking about that later, this year. Like, especially if Indiana's doing great. Like, give him an extension. Already, just go ahead and give him to him. Like, just absolutely. Dave says, you want to trade PJ for Kurt? All I could say is absolutely not. Absolutely not. No way. But that's funny. Absolutely. Aaron says Indiana will be a trap game for the Buckeyes. Could be, especially because of the fact that that's going to be the week before the Michigan game. So you never know. Absolutely. Definitely. Then ZV says the UCLA game had me scared before the season, but I think we can go bowling. Proud to be a Hoosier fan since 2014. What games can we win to get to 6+ wins? Well, yeah, I was nervous about the UCLA game too because I didn't know UCLA was as bad as they are, and I didn't think Indiana was going to be as good as they are. So I thought it would be close. I think I picked Indiana to win by like 10. So they definitely overperformed my expectations. But when you're talking about 6 wins, I mean, obvious wins that you could possibly get would be Purdue. Purdue's looking really bad, like really, really bad. I know Indiana struggles in the old Oak and Bucket game. They've had massive struggles. Even that season when they were 7-4, Purdue was 4-7. Indiana barely won that game with Peyton Ramsey, 44-41 in double overtime. And other than that, Indiana hasn't beat Purdue in a whole long time. So, yeah, but you would think they could beat Purdue. Northwestern doesn't look good either. And they're not going to have any fans. There's not going to be a crowd there because Indiana, going to be going into a basically like a lacrosse field. That Ryan Field got demolished and they're building a new stadium. So Northwestern isn't going to have any fans. So you would think that's not going to really be that much of a challenge. But you never want to take any team for granted. And absolutely when you're Indiana, you don't. But Purdue, Northwestern, Maryland, I mean, this game coming up, absolutely they can win that game. Maryland hasn't looked great, and Indiana's favored by a touchdown. And then Michigan State, they've looked pretty solid, I guess you can say so far. They just lost to Boston College, but Bill O'Brien's got them doing better up there in Chestnut Hill. But, I mean, then you start getting to a stretch with Washington, Nebraska. Even Washington could be possible. It's at Indiana. But Nebraska, Michigan, Ohio State, I think Indiana could go 8-4. I'm not saying that. I actually predicted Indiana to go 7-5 in the preseason, and I thought that was a stretch. That was my preseason prediction of 7-5, 4-5. But I definitely think that is possible now that Signetti hasn't playing the way that they are. Wolverine Gage, appreciate you for stopping by. Says Indiana is better than Boston College. I would say so. I definitely would say that. That's close, though. I would lean Indiana maybe right now like 55-45 against Boston College, that they're better like 55-45. But they're definitely very comparable. But Indiana could be a little bit better. And then we got Jackson pulling up. Indiana at the Voice of College Football link. Absolutely, right there. You guys go subscribe to Indiana at the Voice of College Football. That is where the live stream will be taking place in the future. So if you guys sub over there, you get the notification for that. If you guys would like to hear more about Indiana as the season goes along, definitely appreciate that, Jackson. We'll leave that up there for a little bit so people can do that. But, yeah, Indiana football, a lot of hype, which is rare for Indiana. And like I said, I think it's perfect time for this show. Absolutely perfect time for Hoosiers Live. It's going to be a lot of fun, and hopefully things continue to trend up in the right direction for Indiana. And I do agree with this. Dave saying it's the best Indiana team I've seen since the 93 team. Either that or the 2020 team. The 2020 team was really good, but the season was weird. If you're going to go with a normal season with all the fans, like none of the pandemic stuff, probably 1993. 2019, they were good, but the schedule was very soft. Probably it's not the best indicator of how good Indiana, as a program was that year. But, yeah, 2019, 2020, but 93. Absolutely 1993. Was the last time that Bill Mallory had Indiana doing anything. And then after that, things got really rough. But our next segment of the show is crowd size complaints. Now, this is probably a topic that a lot of people probably don't expect, right? Like crowd size. Because at all of the big schools, we're talking Alabama, we're talking Michigan, Ohio State, Georgia, Texas, Notre Dame, all the big schools. I could go on and on. If I didn't list your school, you're probably furious. But all the big schools, you don't have a crowd problem. They show up every game. Nebraska, right? And even no matter how bad Nebraska is, they always show up. That's why some people say they're the best fans in college football. They'll show up for anything. Well, Indiana, That's been a big issue that Curt Cignetti is trying to get fixed. He's trying to build this program, which is why I'm trying to take him at face value and believe he's in here for the long haul. I hope that he is for the rest of his career. But he's trying to build up the fans for Indiana. Indiana, the fans are not there. And we know why, because Indiana is not a football school. We know they're a basketball school, but you got to support this team. You have to support this team if you are an Indiana fan. Look at this crowd on screen. I don't know. It's probably a little hard to see, but you can see a lot of empty seats. This was during the Charlotte game. Indiana is coming off that big win over UCLA. And I think this was taken after halftime, so there were more fans in the first half. There were more fans. But this is a problem for Indiana. You are playing some of your best football outside of maybe 2019, 2020 in the last 30 years, and this is the best you can do. I know it's early, but I think that there's enough evidence that Indiana is a much better team. That the fans need to support this. This is insane. I mean, there were more fans at the UCLA game, it seemed, right, in the Rose Bowl, which I know that's a unique situation. There were actually some people that flew from the Midwest all the way to LA to watch the game, which is understandable. You know, like, that's a big deal, getting to actually experience Los Angeles. Like, maybe it's one of your only opportunities to do so. And Indiana hasn't been there since 1968. So I get that, but there were so many Indiana fans at that game. And at their own stadium, they're just struggling to get people in. And this is why nobody's taking them seriously. I've literally seen so many people online. And yes, social media is not real life. I understand that. Absolutely. 110% social media is not everything. It's not real life. But people online are saying that Indiana, no matter how good they are, this is why they're not legit. This is why they're not a legit team, because their crowd size is not there. And I don't even know what to say. I really don't, because there's so many Indiana basketball fans. And I know that, like, the basketball stadium only holds like 17,000 people. Basketball is a little bit different. But there are so many Indiana fans in Indianapolis, or so many Indiana fans or alum in Chicago. They can come down and watch a game. They can support this team. And if the Maryland game coming up, and obviously when we get to the preview of Maryland, it's all caveating on whether that hurricane down, which hopefully prayers for everybody that's going to be in the path of that hurricane. Hopefully, I think Hurricane Helene, hopefully it's not going to be bad as it's looking on the radar, but there's looking like it's going to end up going up, and it might impact the weather of this game against Maryland. So if the weather's not bad, Indiana fans need to show up to this game. If the weather's bad, I understand. But if the weather is pretty solid, like it's, even if it's just cloudy, then Indiana fans need to show up to this game. It needs to be close to a sellout, as close to a sellout as you can possibly get. Because one of the last times Indiana actually sold out a game was that Cincinnati game in the 2021 season, when Indiana was coming off the great year in 2020. And then the fans came back and they lost to Iowa, but there was still some hype for Indiana in that Cincinnati game. And at Cincinnati, that's when they had Desmond Ridder. They were ranked, so it was a big deal. And Indiana fans showed up for that game. And the crowd was really loud. Like, Indiana, even though it's a small stadium, only holds 52,000 people. When it's full, it can actually still be a pretty solid environment. It can be good. The people can be loud like any other environment. Like, Rice-Eccles isn't that big in Utah, but they can still put out a lot of crowd noise. It's not always about crowd size. It's just how loud the crowd is, and if the noise, goes out there on the field, affects the players. So Indiana needs more fans, because I do agree. Like, if you can't get fans, if you can't bring out the people, then it does look pathetic. It looks absolutely pathetic. I mean, you take a team like Maryland, who Indiana is going to be playing. Maryland, most of the time, like, unless Ohio State's going to Maryland and Maryland has like a decent enough team, Maryland never sells out. Maryland never hardly has any fans there. That's why it's a lot of times easy to beat them on their own field. Michigan State beat them on their own field the couple weeks ago. So that's the big problem for teams like this, when you don't have a loyal fan base and your team is not consistently good. The fans are not there. But Indiana really has no excuse here. With the way they've played to start the year, yeah, the opponents haven't been there, but that's why I'm really looking at this Maryland game, especially if the weather's not bad. If in the Maryland game, the crowd is close to full capacity, if it can get to a sellout. They actually, according to online, which I don't know how much you could trust, like ticket services, they claim that the tickets are getting low. So that might be a very good sign for Indiana's crowd in this game, but they need to get consistent crowds at games. If Kurt Signetti and the players are delivering the product, if they're doing a good job, then you need to have fans consistently show up. That's just my opinion for Indiana. But some of the comments, though, keep chopping, says Indiana's going 6-0 going to the bye week. If they are 6-0, that's going to make that Nebraska game huge. You didn't keep up your end of the deal, Nebraska. Nebraska lost the game. It'd have been great if Indiana and Nebraska were undefeated. Absolutely. But Nebraska couldn't keep up their end of the deal. Hopefully Indiana can. Aaron Taylor says this Indiana team is going to beat somebody. You can just feel it. Yeah, they might surprise somebody. They really could. Jim says, yeah, Penn State doesn't have that issue. A lot of teams don't. Right? I mean, you're talking about some programs that have had some rough years. Like Nebraska's always the one that I go to. Vandy Dandy, appreciate you for stopping by. He says it right here. There's nothing to do in Nebraska other than go to a football game. Well, I mean, yeah, you do have Notre Dame. I get you have Notre Dame. And that's been the biggest problem for Indiana, really, has been Notre Dame. That Indiana fans support basketball, but then they support Notre Dame in football. There's so many crossover fans. Why can't you support Notre Dame and Indiana? Support them both. Like, that's okay. I like multiple teams. I like Alabama in football. I like Indiana. I like Carolina pretty well. Like, why can't you do that? Why can't you support both? That's what they need to do. You know, watch Indiana if they're good. I mean, if they're bad, I understand. Like, you don't want to watch a bad team, especially when you're not that loyal. But, I mean, yeah, like, yikes. I mean, it's insane. And I will say, this picture was taken in the second half. There were more fans in the first half. There were. But that's been another problem for Indiana. Like, they can get fans to come at the beginning of the game because I think out of the 52,000 seat, facility that this is, Memorial Stadium, I think they had about 43,000 for this game. So, I mean, it was about like 80% capacity, but by the second half, they had less than 20,000. So, I mean, that's garbage. You got to keep fans the entire game. And I know Indiana was beaten, they were beating Charlotte by a lot. They were destroying them. But still, like, that should make you happy and want to stay. Like, your team's doing good. So, I don't know. Aaron Taylor said, what else do they have to do on a Saturday in Indiana? Get out to the game. Absolutely. Like, it's not like Indiana is that much different than Nebraska. I mean, they are a little bit. You got the Colts. Like, I know they got professional teams, and a lot of them do support the Colts. They'll go to Colts games, just forget about Indiana. But it's still pathetic to me. It really is. That Indiana cannot get more fans than this to stay at least the whole game, but through, even in the first half. And Andy Danny says Indiana isn't legit because the crowd size, the talent on their team. Vanderbilt would handily beat Indiana this year. Okay, Vandy Dandy. I mean, that'd be cool. I'd love to see Indiana play Vanderbilt. I mean, Vanderbilt, I will say, Vanderbilt's not bad. They're not bad, but I would favor Indiana, though. I would favor Indiana. But, hey, you never know. That would be interesting. I know they hung with Missouri, but Missouri might not be legit. So, Wolverine Gay says, I'm impressed with Indiana. They're definitely a team that could be a trap game for Michigan. Yeah, it could be. I think Indiana could be a trap game for Michigan. Ohio State will be tougher because it's on the road, but I was a little more confident. I'm not going to lie. I was more confident in Indiana having a shot against Michigan until Michigan beat USC. It does seem like the change in quarterback going to Alex Orji is making a difference, right? Like, it's definitely made a difference. So I feel like Indiana will still have a shot against Michigan, but if Michigan continues to improve like they have showcased with the quarterback change in the USC game, then that still might be a little out of reach for Indiana, but it is possible. Keep chopping says the casual fans are probably still skeptical. Absolutely. I mean, no matter how bad Indiana's been, there's always been some fans, judging by the fact that there are people there. Like, they've had some rough seasons. There's still people there. There are some diehards online and that go to the games, but it's not enough. Absolutely not enough. Jim R. is less than an hour away, so no more excuses. I'm going to the Nebraska game. I'll say if Indiana is undefeated in that Nebraska game, there is no reason why they're not sold out. That game better be sold out, and it better not be because there's a lot of Nebraska fans that traveled to Indiana and took the seats. Because I'm not going to lie, that actually was a big reason why the Indiana-Cincinnati game sold out. A lot of Cincinnati fans took the extra seats, and they were there. And when Cincinnati pulled away from Indiana, they made their presence felt. So that's a big issue too. Like, Indiana needs to legitimately sell out in the Nebraska game, and there shouldn't be a lot of Nebraska fans there. There's always going to be road, fans, but not that many is what needs to be the case. So absolutely. Vandy Dandy says Vanderbilt would beat the majority of the Big Ten right now. Absolutely. I don't know. Absolutely for you. I would say I almost said absolutely not, but hey, they would probably beat Northwestern. They'd beat Purdue. They beat some teams. They could probably beat a few. I don't know. That's interesting. I would have to sit on that. I have to think about that. It's like Rutgers. Rutgers is better this year. They're not bad. Illinois is proven to be better. Indiana's better. I don't know. USC would be hard. Probably impossible. Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. A lot of tough teams. I don't know about that, right? Like that's tough. But again, for you, Vandy, I would say you never know. Maybe some of them. ZV Rusty says Indiana will always be a basketball school attendance-wise unless they host Ohio State, Michigan, or Penn State. I think we will have a better road game attendance, especially out west with the transplants. For sure. Yeah, with the out west games, they're going to have fans there, especially if they're good. And hopefully, if Cignetti stays, it'll be good for years to come and continue to actually give people reason to watch. But yeah, they're always going to be a basketball school. But the thing is I do believe that there is potential for some schools to become both. Look at even Alabama. I mean, I've been an Alabama football fan forever. Right? Like they have always been a football school. But Alabama basketball, I would tune into Alabama basketball, and they wouldn't have any fans. They barely would have any fans, right? Now they do. Alabama basketball is good now. I mean, they're not elite, but they're good. And they're getting fans to show out. And actually, the Alabama-Auburn game in basketball is well attended, both sides. Even Auburn has great fans for basketball, it seems now. So I think there is potential for some schools to do that. Michigan State has been really solid in football a lot of the time, and in basketball, they're solid. So I think you can have crossover. It's just about if you're good. If Indiana football can become good and more on a regular basis, more so on a regular basis, I think they can get more fans. And I think that it can still be a basketball school, but you can kind of transfer some of that over to football. And kind of be like, hey, like Kentucky's a basketball school, but they've had success in football. They have fans there. Why can't Indiana do that? Absolutely. I mean, trust me. I've done content on my channel, right? On Only Talk Sports, which is also where you can find me, right? I've done basketball content on there. And Indiana basketball content does a whole lot better than football content. But I do think if Indiana football can do good and be relevant, I think they can get more fans, but we need to see it. So calling out Indiana fans, you got to show up to the Maryland game, make your presence felt, and quit being an embarrassment to college football. It's absolutely embarrassing. There are even articles written about this, that Indiana's winning and there's still no fans. Absolutely pathetic. We need to see more fans. Curt Cignetti wants to see more fans. And maybe if you show up to the games, support the team, Cignetti might stay longer. Maybe that will keep him from not going to the job if you show up. So that's a call to action for Indiana football fans. If you're out there, support this team. Kuz's Corner, appreciate you for stopping by. So just popping in to say Jeffrey does a great job. Please hit the like button. I appreciate that, Kuz's Corner. Absolutely. So glad to see you. And Wolverine Gates is Vandy Stadium's garbage. I will say that Indiana Stadium, now that they've renovated, they have renovated the stadium. It looks a lot nicer than it did back in like 2008, because I have like the 2008 college football video game or whatever, and Indiana Stadium in that game, which obviously it's an old game, but it looked rough. It was not enclosed. It just kind of looked more like a Northwestern. Now they've enclosed it. It looks a whole lot nicer. They've done a lot of renovations. So Indiana definitely upping their game with their stadium. Vanderbilt, their stadium is one of the worst in college football, especially for a major school. And I've heard a lot of people say that they do not enjoy going to Vanderbilt games. Like the seating is bad. They need to improve that. They need to do what Northwestern's doing. They need to fix that stadium. Absolutely. I thought I did see that, Vandy Dandy. They are renovating the stadium. Good move for Vanderbilt. That would help a lot, right? I think that would actually help with maybe, getting more fans to show up, especially if they have a decent team, which is rare, but it has happened. James Franklin did it. I mean, they've had some success in football. It's rare. But if you can get a better stadium, I think that would help a whole lot. Keep chopping says, wasn't Vandy the team that hung a scoreboard from a crane? I remember that. I remember seeing that. Oh, my goodness. See, that's a bad look. Like, Indiana at least doesn't have that. Indiana Stadium's better. Oh, man, that's not a good look. But crowd size complaints, Cignetti calling for fans. They got to show up. Now, the next segment for the show is surprise/key players for Indiana so far this season. Why are they 4-0? Why are they looking good? Well, the players are just as important as the coach, right? So we're talking about Cignetti and all that he's done. But it's the players he's brought in. He basically brought in most of the key players from James Madison and a whole host of other transfers from a whole lot of other schools. And this is why Indiana football is better, because they just had the same guys they had last year. Probably wouldn't be all that good so far. But Cignetti had to bring in some guys, some new faces to make them a better team. And the number one key player for Indiana has been Curtis Rourke at quarterback, the transfer from Ohio. 71 of 94 for 1,013 yards, which you could say in 4 games, I've seen better. I've seen guys, throw for more yards than that. But the completion percentage is what's really good. And yeah, their opponents have been rough. They haven't been that good. But 75% completion percentage is solid. The main key, though, is this. 8 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. Curtis Rourke has not thrown a pick. And hopefully that doesn't start in this Maryland game. Hopefully he can continue to not have any turnovers. But what's even more crazy is the fact when you talk about records, right? That was another thing. I forgot this. Indiana's 4-game stretch that they've had so far this season. It's the first 4-game stretch that they have not had a turnover or an interception since 1996. That's insane. So we're talking about 28 years of not going 4 games without a turnover or a pick. And that's another thing. Indiana has no turnovers. Absolutely none. They haven't fumbled the ball, and they haven't thrown any picks. And like I said, hopefully that doesn't start against Maryland, because it could, because Maryland does have a couple guys on defense who are really solid at picking balls off. Their whole defense isn't that great, but they do have a couple guys. They have a couple guys that can pick the ball off. So I'm a little nervous about that. But so far, they've been fantastic in not turning the ball over. Joseph Kirk saying Indiana who? Well, Indiana, a lot of people might not know they have a football team, but they do now. They got a legit team with Cignetti. John Jacobs, appreciate you for stopping by as well. Says Curtis Rourke is a better passer than Anthony Richardson for 5 25 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, and Indianapolis resident. Absolutely. Glad you stopped by. Hopefully you show up again in the future when we have more Indiana live shows. Appreciate you for stopping by. Absolutely. But as an Indianapolis native, you know all about Anthony Richardson. He's very turnover prone, and that's the biggest key for Curtis Rourke. Yeah, he can throw the ball downfield. He can throw the ball short, but it's that intermediate pass. That is one of the most effective passes in all of college football, and that is what we have not seen in a long time when it comes to Indiana football, is having a guy that can consistently hit a guy over the middle. Even Penix struggled with it at times. He could do it, but Rourke is hitting those 15-yard passes over the first line of defense, but before the second line of defense, sneaking those receivers in there and methodically moving the ball down the field. And yeah, they have not had, tough opponents. I keep referencing that. Yeah, that's why their numbers look so good. But that's what's so impressive when it comes to Indiana football with Curtis Rourke, is that he can just consistently move the ball down the field. Those intermediate passes, just so impressive. We got Dave Valensky with a super chat. Appreciate that, Dave Valensky. He says, I could see Indiana in the Holiday Bowl or the Outback Bowl, which, I miss the Outback Bowl. They should have never got rid of that. Isn't it like the ReliaQuest Bowl now? It's some horrible name. But yeah, I miss the Outback Bowl. But yeah, I think Indiana could be in either of those bowls. Absolutely. Is the Holiday Bowl still a Big Ten bowl? I'm not even sure. The bowls just keep changing, and it's insane. But definitely appreciate the super chat. John Jacobs said, just subscribe. Absolutely, John. And for reference, this show is going to be on the Indiana at the Voice of College Football channel next week. If Jackson's still in the chat, hopefully you can put that back in there. But you definitely will want to subscribe to the Indiana channel, because that's where this show is going to be in the future. I'm pretty sure about that. So definitely appreciate for subbing to the Voice of College Football. But you're gonna love, especially if Indiana has a good season, you're gonna love some more Hoosier content. Absolutely, but definitely appreciate it. But Curtis Rourke, though, having a lot of success through the air, 110%. But it's not just him, though. Something that Indiana has not had since Stevie Scott is really a good running back. So Stevie Scott was a good running back, especially at first when Indiana had good offensive linemen back in the Kevin Wilson era. But then into the Tom Allen era, their offensive line just progressively got worse once the Kevin Wilson guys got out of the program. But Indiana's running back room, the whole room is key. I can't even say there's like a surprise, because we knew with Cignetti that they were going to be able to run the football well, but I think it's a surprise that all of them are doing good, all 4 of the main backs. So you got Justice Ellison with 290 rushing yards, 7.6 yards a carry. Then you got Tyson Lawton, who's kind of like a big back. He's kind of almost like a fullback in a way with how he's built. 184 yards, 5 yards a carry. Then Elijah Green, he's got 17 carries, 157 yards, 9.2 a carry. And then Kalen Black, 113 yards, 6.3 a carry. That is insane. You got look at all these touchdowns. 4 touchdowns, 5 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns, 1 touchdown. That's insane. Like, Indiana has 3 running backs with over 4 touchdowns already. in 4 games. Like in the last couple years, Indiana couldn't run the ball at all. It's insane to me. Oh, James Scott, I don't know if you're talking about me or someone in the chat, but not really a great take when most have had just as easy of a schedule at this point. You could be talking about someone in the chat, but I think it is impressive that Indiana has had this good of a run game, because the past 3 years they haven't been able to run the football at all. Like they were averaging like 2 yards a carry. And these numbers are going to go down. Absolutely, they're going to go down. They're not going to be averaging 7 and 9 yards a carry when they play better teams. Okay, someone in chat. Do appreciate it for stopping by, James. But Indiana's run game's much better. And I think a lot of it has to do with the O-line, which we're going to get to the O-line. But I think that when you look at this run game, the fact that they can complement Rourke is why he's been so efficient. Because it means Indiana doesn't have to throw the ball every single time. They can actually run the ball. That's big. That's a big deal. Absolutely a big deal. I mean, look at those 3 guys all combined. They're combining for like 700 rushing yards or like 800. I mean, it's been impressive. I like Indiana's run game. It's great. We got Jeff with a $10 super chat. Appreciate that, Jeff. Definitely. Always appreciate the super chats. No comment, but definitely thanks a lot and appreciate you for being here. But yes, do love the run game for Indiana football. And then when you look at the receivers, none of them are really standing out, which is insane, right? You got some teams like Maryland, who Indiana is going to be playing. You know, they got Ty Felton. Ty Felton has like 600 receiving yards for Maryland in 4 games, which for some teams, that's like the best that they could do, right? And then you talk about Indiana. They got this balance at receiver. Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper, Miles Price, and Miles Cross, all with over 150 receiving yards. And then when you look at the fact that down the roster at Donovan McCulley, only 1 reception for 9 yards because he's been banged up. He was Indiana's leading receiver last year, and he only has 1 reception for 9 yards. And he could be Indiana's best receiver after Elijah Surratt. Now, I would argue that Omar Cooper is probably better overall as a receiver. McCulley's just tall and can really catch balls up high, like that one-handed catch he had last year. But that's crazy, though, to me, that all of these receivers are just so balanced and being able to have different, abilities on catching the ball. Like Miles Cross, Miles Price are more slot receivers, but Surratt, he's the downfield guy like McCulley. Cooper's kind of in between. And I agree with John Jacobs. No receiver stands out because Rourke spreads the ball around. And that's a sign of a great QB. Absolutely. Then we got Jim R saying, giving a Hoosier shout out, Jeffrey. Well done. Appreciate the super chat. Absolutely. Thanks for the shout out. Glad you're here. And we're going to be having more Indiana content on the way in the future. But definitely appreciate the $20 super chat. Moose says Jeffrey got his own show, huh? We got Indiana. We're here to be talking about Indiana football for the rest of the season and beyond. Hopefully, Kurt Signetti stays and makes it a lot more fun. But yes, we're talking Indiana football. Definitely appreciate that, Moose. But yeah, Indiana's receiving room, just solid, like the running back room. No one's standing out. And that's, to me, like the most important thing. The fact that also these guys don't really even want to stand out. It's a team effort. They're balled into this team and Kurt Signetti and the team success, and they're all playing very well. And then the O-line. Obviously, the offensive line doesn't have any stats, but you got to shout out the O-line. They're giving Rourke protection. He's not getting sacked a lot. They're giving running lanes for the running backs. That's crazy to me that Indiana's O-line can be good. I haven't seen it in like 10 years, right? Like really when I even started watching Indiana football, their O-line wasn't that good. O-line, bad opponents, but it's been fantastic. So that's been a surprise. I'll say a surprise position for Indiana. Kicking game's been great. Haven't missed any field goals. That's solid. Then on defense, a surprise player's been Sean Asbury. 20 tackles, total tackles. He's been very good. 2 passes deflected. He's been a really solid player. Aiden Fisher, Jalen Walker, 2 transfers. Not a surprise. They've both been fantastic. Josh Sanguinetti, he's been a returning guy for Indiana, so he's been solid. But absolutely, like you're talking about a defense is pretty stout. And when Signetti saw him give up 14 to Charlotte, he was not happy about it. And that's great to see. Like you want a coach that's going to be mad when you're giving up points, especially with an inferior opponent, when you feel like you could have stopped, right? When you feel like you could have been able to shut them out completely. That's a great coach. That's just a great coach. So the defense is doing a great job in that regard. Moose says, heading to the Michigan show. Appreciate that, Moose. Definitely. Glad you were able to make it before the Michigan show, but absolutely appreciate you for stopping by. Michael Wheatley says, go Terps. It's going to be a fun game, Michael. Hopefully you stay for the preview because we're about to be getting to that. We're about to be getting to the preview of the Indiana-Maryland game. But I think that, like, the key positions have been running back and O-line for the fact that, and a surprise, especially with the O-line, and the fact that it's been better than expected. And then, like, on defense, some of the players have been a shock that, like, Sean Asbury playing as well as he has. But Aiden Fisher, Jalen Walker, Indiana's linebackers, that's the one group they've always been good at, right? Aaron Casey, Cam Jones, Micah McFadden. They've had some really good linebackers, and they got some good linebackers this year. It's just been the rest of the defense that hasn't really been there for Indiana and playing all that well. But I do believe that that's changing. It's a whole lot different now. The corners are good. The safeties are good. And the D-line, still not one of the most stout in the Big Ten, but you got Mikel Kamara, who's further down on this list because he doesn't have a lot of tackles. But Mikel Kamara, he's got multiple sacks, got 3 sacks on the season. He's Indiana's best player on the D-line. And if Indiana's going to have any shot of sacking some of the better teams' quarterbacks in the Big Ten, it's going to be him. He's a fantastic defensive lineman. Possibly be drafted. I think Indiana might actually have some players drafted this year. They got some good players, but that's definitely way ahead of things. But still, I really like the direction that Indiana's team is because it's a team effort. It's not just one player. But we got Indiana-Maryland prediction time. We're going to be previewing and predicting this game. It's a noon game on Saturday. And I will have to preface that the weather is a big deal. The weather is 110% a big deal for this game. Because you're talking about the fact that Hurricane Helene might end up going up into the middle of the U.S. and it might have some rain. So that's definitely something to watch. I think it's a good sign for Indiana that they can run the football. They can run the football. So if things are rough through the air, you can't throw the ball, Indiana can run. Maryland's more of a passing team too. So it might actually, in a way, benefit Indiana if the weather's bad. But I would prefer the weather to be good. So there's fans there, possibly a sellout crowd, and Indiana can run their whole offense. But that's something that we'll have to monitor when it comes to that department. But we already got some predictions in chat. I haven't even got to it yet. Keep chopping those. It's Indiana 54, Maryland 17. If that happens, Indiana's definitely ranked. And I think people will really believe him. Jason says Maryland 28, Indiana 17. We don't like seeing that, Jason. We don't like seeing that. But you never know. Maryland's not a bad team. But Indiana, they're favored by 7 at home. Usually the home spread's by 3. So we'll see. Vandy Danny says Saturday the Hurricane will only be in Georgia and the Carolinas. I've seen that, but I've also seen where like the rain like will be above it, could cause maybe a bit of wind, some rain. It's just something to watch. Might not even be a problem. Michael Wheatley, he's going with his Terps 31-24. Jim saying 28-17 IU. But we got to look at Maryland's team though, because how good are they? And the players they have is going to determine this game just as much as Indiana's players. How a game works. Both teams and their players, and obviously their coach as well, Mike Loxley. I think he's a solid coach. I don't think he's a fantastic coach, but he's not doing too bad. I think his record's under 500, but Maryland's not an easy place to win at. So give him some slack. Billy Edwards, 102 of 136, 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns, 2 picks. And Billy Edwards is somebody Curt Cignetti knows. He actually recruited him to James Madison, but he didn't go to James Madison. He went to Wake Forest. Then he ended up going to Maryland. But Billy Edwards, though, I mean, this guy could not throw the ball to save his life a couple years ago. He's a lot better now. He actually could throw the ball. So Billy Edwards, he's not just a runner. Indiana's going to have to watch out for that. And that's something if it's raining, he can use his legs. So he's not a slouch. He's not somebody that Indiana could just overlook because he has more passing yards than Rourke does. So he can play. He's gotten a whole lot better. He's not someone to overlook at all, and Curt Cignetti has said that. Like, Indiana's defense needs to keep their eyes on Billy Edwards because he is a solid quarterback. Maryland's run game hasn't been elite, but Roman Hemby, he was with the program last year. He has 201 rushing yards. He's got 2 touchdowns. But you can see, like, Maryland doesn't have as many rushing touchdowns as Indiana does. And yeah, Maryland has had 2, I guess you would say tougher games. They played Virginia, they played Michigan State, whereas Indiana's only had UCLA. So Indiana's numbers are a bit inflated, but you can tell that Maryland's not a great running team. They're not a great rushing attack. They have some decent players, but their O-line might not be one of the best in college football. It's not one of the better ones in the Big Ten. So we'll have to see how Indiana's D-line affects Maryland's run game. But I really believe, like, if Indiana can, for the most part, shut down the run game for Maryland, that will really help because it puts more pressure on Edwards. That's why with Rourke, it's been great for Indiana that he can have that rushing attack next to him, those 4 running backs that take pressure off of him. If you can run and pass, makes it life a lot easier on the quarterback. So we'll have to watch there. But the key player for Maryland is Ty Felton. I already mentioned him because Ty Felton, look at his stats, 604 yards in 4 games, which is unreal. We're talking about a stat line that a lot of receivers only achieve at the end of the season. 41 receptions, 604 yards, and he also has 5 touchdowns. So Ty Felton, he's a problem. Ty Felton is a really, really good player. But the thing is, though, is that he's by far their best receiver. So if Indiana can shut him down, you do have Caden Prather. He was a transfer from West Virginia. He's not a bad player. 203 receiving yards. He's not bad. He's a good secondary option. And they got a tight end, Dylan Wade, 168 yards, but then nothing after that. So all Indiana has to do is keep their eyes on Felton, keep their eyes on him, and you can shut him, or not really shut him down, but limit him. Like if they can hold him to like 80 receiving yards instead of like what he's been getting, like 160 yards a game, that will be big for Indiana. Cannot let Ty Felton go off for a big game. And I think Indiana's corners, Sean Asbury, D'Angelo Pons, they're good enough to limit him. Not good enough to stop him, but if they can limit him, that will really help Indiana because they just don't have a lot of other great wide receivers. And then looking at their defense, they definitely do not have as many standout guys as Indiana does, especially in the tackles department. Dante Trader, Ruben Hippolyte, 2 really solid players when it comes to the linebacker and defensive back spot. D-line, I mean, they got some good players. I'm not discrediting Maryland. Like they have a decent defense, but they did give up 20 to Villanova, which I know Indiana gave up 14 to Charlotte, but Villanova's worse than Charlotte. They did hold Virginia to 13. That's pretty good. Virginia's not a great team, though. So I think Maryland, like defense-wise, they're not bad. That's some players. They don't really have any standout players. They have a few guys I recognize. They're not bad. So for Indiana, especially, I think Maryland's one of their bigger weaknesses is like the secondary. That's where Indiana might be able to expose them with the passing game, especially if the weather's good. That's why I'm really keen on that weather. It's got to be good. You do not want to have, poor weather in this game because then Indiana can really air it out on them. I think Maryland's defensive, secondary, defensive backs are a little bit weaker. So that's a big key to watch. But looking at some more of the comments, John Jacobs says, I almost said Josh Jacobs. John Jacobs, giving up 20 to Villanova is like me giving up 20 to my grandmother. Well, yeah, I don't know. I mean, you probably can put up more points. I mean, maybe your grandmother can keep up. We'll see. You never know. But that's funny. Michael Wheatley says trash touchdowns at the end. They played third string. Well, that's fair. I will say that. I do notice in a lot of games like that, you usually sometimes give up garbage touchdowns. But that's one thing Indiana has been doing with Cignetti. Like they have been shutting down, teams at the end. Like they have not been letting them score garbage touchdowns for the most part. Jace says Indiana won't be able to cover Felton. He's like the main player that I'm worried about. Like for Maryland, Felton is good. I mean, he's probably going to be in the NFL, like no doubt. He's a really good receiver. Dave Valensky says 35-28 Indiana. Okay, so what is my final prediction for this game? I went back and forth a little bit because I know Maryland has given Indiana some troubles recently, but that was under Tom Allen. They've won the last 3 games against Indiana. But to be fair, they couldn't beat Indiana before that. Indiana was actually dominating Maryland for the most part, even though the games were very close earlier in the Tom Allen era and the Kevin Wilson era. And toward the tail end of the Tom Allen era, everybody was dominating Indiana because they were not good. So that was a big problem there. But Maryland, Indiana, usually competitive games. Maryland's won the last 3, but Indiana's a different team now. They have too much confidence. Cignetti, he's going to get them ready to play. He's not going to let them overlook Maryland because Maryland, why would you overlook them? They beat you the last 3 times. They're a solid team. They got quality players. Loxley's a solid coach, but it's at Indiana. I think the crowd's going to be really good in this game. The first time Indiana has a legit crowd. And if the weather is good, Indiana will be able to throw the ball. So will Maryland. But I do think Indiana is going to beat Maryland 31-20. Maybe I'm a little bullish on Indiana, but I've seen some great things from Indiana football this season. So much so, more than Maryland, that I believe Indiana wins this game. Could Maryland win? Absolutely. And if they did, it wouldn't shock me. And would it ruin Indiana's season if they lost? No, it would not. They could still make a bowl game, achieve all that they want to achieve, for Indiana fans anyway. I mean, the dream of making the playoff and all that kind of stuff would die, which some people have right now for Indiana, which is insane that we're even mentioning it, and it's a possibility. I'm nowhere near that. They got to win these games first. Beat Maryland, beat Northwestern. If you beat Nebraska, then we'll talk a little bit about playoff, but we're not there. So if Indiana loses this game, no, it won't wreck their season. They can still make a bowl game, still win 6-7 games. But I think this is a big game for Indiana because I believe that even though the UCLA game opened some people's eyes, I believe a game like this will show people it's not a fluke. They're not messing around. Like Indiana, they can beat comparable teams because Maryland's a comparable team to Indiana. They've always been a comparable team to each other. There's never really been a point in the last 15 years where either program's been like that far ahead or behind one another. They're very similar programs. I mean, they actually even have similar fan size. You look at like social media, like they're two teams that have like similar fan interests. They're more basketball schools. Maryland's more of a basketball school. Indiana definitely is. And you know, they're not great in football. Maryland's usually better than Indiana, but still, like they're pretty similar to one another. And I think Indiana's on a higher trajectory right now than Maryland. Billy Edwards, solid quarterback. Ty Felton, great receiver. They don't have a whole lot else. Indiana, I can list tons of players. D'Angelo Pons, Mikael Kamara, Curtis Rourke, all the running backs, all the receivers. Like to me, they have more oomph to their team. More dynamic players, and they got the better coach. And a lot of times when you got the better coach, and I know some people would say it's too premature to say that, but Cignetti, he's proven it wherever he's been. Cignetti is, to me, he's a better coach than Loxley. Indiana, I think, has a slightly better team than Maryland, and I think that will result in a win. If Maryland wins, it will be fantastic for the Terps, and it will definitely help their chances of making a bowl game because, I mean, they're 3-1 right now. They still have a lot to achieve, but still, like if they lose this game, put them kind of in a little bit of a pickle to make a bowl, but it's still possible. But it's a big game for both teams. It's a swing game, and really for Indiana to showcase that they're continuing to improve. They're continuing to show that they're not what they were at the end of the Tom Allen era, and that this is a new Indiana football. We got James Scott saying giving up 70 to James Madison is like being from North Carolina. Yeah, I like the Tar Heels. I mean, I like Tar Heel basketball more so, but man, that was embarrassing. People were saying that Mac Brown retired too, it was making me laugh. I'm like, really? John Jacobs said Cignetti over Tom Allen. Absolutely, he's better than Tom Allen. But yeah, I think Mac Brown will retire soon, but not right now. John Jacobs says, ooh, close to my Indiana 30, Maryland 17. It just feels right. It feels like that's about where, you know, the game's going to be, the score's going to be. That's what I'm feeling. Wolverine Gage, Indiana looks good, Jeffrey. Hopefully they keep it up. I'm going to head to the Michigan show. Absolutely, Wolverine Gage. I appreciate you for being here. Appreciate you for sticking out the whole show. Absolutely. But yeah, I hope Indiana has a great year. I'm looking forward to the rest of the season. And I'm so glad all you guys showed up too. I really appreciate it. The first edition of Hoosiers Live will be back in the future. We'll be back for more shows. Like Indiana Hoosiers Live 2 will be coming out next Tuesday at 7. Probably going to be on the Indiana channel. So hopefully if Jackson's still here, I don't know if he is, he can send out the link for that. But I'm sure a lot of you guys did it earlier. But I really do appreciate you guys for being. Appreciate the super chats as well that we had from Dave, Jeff, and Jim. Absolutely appreciate it. But yeah, I don't know. Vandy Daddy saying Vandy's the best 2-2 team in the country. I mean, I don't know. I mean, for you, I want to say so, but I'd have to go through every team. And take a look at that. I mean, yeah, I'm sure like most of the best teams in college football are going to only have one loss or none at this point, but you know, I don't know. I mean, even if that's true, is that like an accomplishment? Like, I don't know. Like Vandy, I want to back Vandy for you, but I really don't know. I have to see more from Vandy. Jim says, nice seeing Indiana and Illinois having teams this year. Absolutely. Like, you don't want to just see the same teams, have success, right? Like, you don't want to see it just be Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State. Like, it's good for college football for those teams to be good. But you want to see teams like Maryland or Indiana or Illinois have success. Like, they're teams too. They got fans, even if they're a lot smaller. But, hey, with more success, their fans will grow. You think Utah had as many fans as they did before Urban Meyer and Whittingham? Absolutely not. You get good coaches, you have success, they will come. The fans will come. And that's what we hope that we see from Indiana in the future. If they continue to have success and Curt Cignetti stays, which is the most important thing. Absolutely. The most important thing for Indiana, that they can keep him. Pay the man, give him an extension, And hopefully they keep their coordinators for a while too. Mike Shanahan, that's another thing. I didn't even mention the coordinators. Indiana's coordinators are really good. Tino Suntory, Mike Shanahan, Bryant Haynes, absolutely. Like they got some good coordinators. All of them coming over from James Madison. The only returnee from the Tom Allen tenure was Bob Bostad, the O-line coach that came from Wisconsin. He's good. So, like, Indiana's got legit coordinators. And that's why Indiana had success with Tom Allen. Because of the fact they had Kalen DeBoer's now at Alabama, Kane Womack, who was at South Alabama. Now he's at Alabama, too, as defensive coordinator. You got to have good coaches all across the board to win. If you got good players and good coaches, you're going to win. If you got good players, but you don't have good coaches, you're not going to be all that good. And if you got good coaches, but not good players, you're definitely not going to win. You have to have good coaches and good players. And I think Indiana has both. And that's why you're seeing this resurgence from Indiana. Showcasing any team can win with the right players and the right coaches. Jackson saying Indiana at the voice of college football. There's the link. If you guys would like to subscribe to that channel, would really appreciate it because that is where the show will be in the future. Can't stress that enough. If you want more Indiana Hoosiers live content, just like you saw today, that's where you want to see it at right there. At Indiana at the voice of college football. Definitely would hope you guys show up for future shows because it's been a lot of fun tonight. I've had a lot of fun. And yeah, it's more fun to talk about a team when they're winning. But even if Indiana's losing, we'll be talking about the Hoosiers. It's going to be a lot of fun. Absolutely. But do appreciate all you guys for being here. I mean, it's been fun. Like, I can't wait for this game. Like, if Indiana wins, then Indiana might be ranked. And they should be ranked, really. They really should be ranked. But even now, I think there's a possibility that they should have been ranked. And I agree with James Scott. The genuine rankings have not been released. Absolutely. The college football playoff rankings are what matter, right? The AP poll doesn't matter. The CFP poll matters because what you're ranked in that is going to determine whether you make the playoff or not. Like just say, for example, Penn State in the AP poll is 13th, right? But then in the college football playoff poll, they're 11th. Well, they're going to be in the playoff. That's what matters. Absolutely. It doesn't matter if the AP poll is important right now because it's what people look at teams as. Oh, they're the number 20th team. They're the number 27 team. But when the CFP poll comes out, then the AP poll just doesn't really matter. And I am a believer anyway that you shouldn't even have rankings until like week 4, 5, 6 anyway because you don't know how good teams are. Yeah, you can kind of get a picture. Some teams are always good usually, like Georgia or Alabama, but still, it's not always the case. Like some teams start out high, like Florida State, and then they just fall out of the rankings. You never hear from them again. They weren't that good. So it happens. I think the AP poll, it's all for like ratings and just to get people back engaged in college football. That's all it's about. I don't agree with it. I mean, it's kind of dumb, but it is what it is. Keith Chops says a clown show. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, man. I mean, I don't think it's like that bad, but it is rough. I mean, there are a lot of inconsistencies with the AP poll. That's why Mark Rogers has the top 25 that actually makes sense. The top 25 that actually makes sense is a more objective ranking. But even as Mark says, no ranking is perfect. I did rankings before on my channel, which Jackson, appreciate you for shouting it out. If you like to go subscribe to my channel, Only Talk Sports, you can check it out at that link as well, where I talk a bunch of other stuff besides football, basketball, NBA, NFL, all that kind of stuff. And also my Twitter account and my Rumble account. I have a Rumble account for my YouTube channel. But if you guys like to check that out, would appreciate it, where I talk about a bunch of other things besides Indiana. But I did rankings before myself. You know, I spent 1 year and I did like a ranking of my own all year long. And I'm like, you know what? Like, what does my ranking really matter? Like, especially at the beginning of the season, it just felt like I was guessing, right? Like, I don't know how good these teams are. You're going to know how good teams are by the end of the season. And obviously injuries do happen, which can make teams look worse than they would have been if they didn't have injuries. But that's all part of the game. Can't do anything about that. But yeah, the rankings matter more toward the end of the season. I agree. James says precisely, Jeffrey, my position has always been no polls to be released until post week 5. For sure. I mean, it just doesn't even make any sense. I don't understand it. I don't get it. It's all about just grabbing people's attention. It's an attention grabber. It's like, oh, college football's back. It's coming up in a couple weeks. So we're going to list the AP poll, coaches poll, and we're going to put all the teams that everybody like knows the most, like all the big brands. That's why like A&M and some of these teams, like usually like lately it's been A&M and Miami have always been ranked, even when they hadn't deserved it. Or that one year that Nebraska was ranked like 24th before they went 4-8 under Scott Frost. That stuff happens. They just put like the most popular teams, they rank them. And sometimes, a lot of times, those teams aren't good. Obviously, Miami's good this year, it seems. But you know what I'm saying? It happens all the time. They put teams that just don't even deserve to be ranked. And the SEC has a lot of ranked teams. Now, I understand it. The SEC is loaded as a conference, but I do think, like, especially Missouri being ranked as high as they were at the beginning of the season. I know they're still undefeated. They're not a bad team. But yeah, I definitely don't think that, they're as good as what they were ranked as. They're already falling in the poll because they're barely beating people. Barely beating Vanderbilt. Sorry, Vandy Dandy, but Missouri barely beat Vanderbilt, made Missouri look bad, so they dropped in the polls, right? Like, if Missouri barely beat like LSU then or something like that, they wouldn't have fallen in the poll. But since it was Vanderbilt, they dropped them in the poll. It is what it is. That's your fault, AP voters, for having them ranked that high. Keith Chavez says the polls are for writers and media hype. It's a whatever. Absolutely. And Hummus Hero says, hey, Jerry, who's your fan of all their college football fanatics? Absolutely. Thanks for stopping by, Hummus Hero. Since you just stopped by, my prediction for Indiana, Maryland was 31-20. Definitely. A&M's ranked. That's a 5-7 team at best. That's my point, though. Like you said, they're just not that good. But Indiana, they're not ranked yet. But if they beat Maryland, they will be ranked after that game. And that'll be big for Indiana and their fans, and to get more people to say, hey, Indiana, they're a solid team this year in college football. Definitely looking forward to the game. Vandy says Mizzou's ranked out of Michigan. Absolutely. Like, Michigan's probably better, especially now they beat USC. But it is what it is. But thanks again for everybody stopping by to the first edition of Hoosiers Live at the Voice of College Football. We will be having it on the Indiana channel next week, but definitely appreciate all you guys for stopping by. It was a fun show. Again, my final predictions, Indiana 31, Maryland 20. If you guys like the show, like the stream down below, subscribe to the Voice of College Football and the Indiana channel. And if you'd like to check me out at Only Talk Sports, would definitely appreciate that as well. But definitely, most importantly, appreciate all you guys for being here, and the super chats. Definitely helps out the channel. And hopefully it's a great week for Indiana football. It's the start of a new era for Curt Cignetti, start of a new show, and hopefully a lot more success to come with Cignetti at the Indiana Hoosiers. Appreciate everybody for being here tonight. It was a lot of fun.